Hello students and welcome back again. In today's lesson, we're going to talk about classes in Python, yeah? Now, previously we talked about functions and lambda functions and the rest, but this video, we're going to talk more about classes, okay? And objects, yeah? Now, as I told you previously that Python itself is an object-oriented programming, which means it can be encapsulated, it can be abstracted, it can inherit, and it can polymorphize. Okay, so these are the four pillars when you're talking about OOPs in programming, like object-oriented programming. Yeah, OOP. Let me give you an example. Imagine we have a class name as a human. Okay, every human has a name, right? So here the name of the human is an object. Okay, then every name too has some attributes. Okay, like age, this kind of the person can have a skin color. Those are the attributes of what the human. Okay, then we have also what we call methods. Okay, methods can be like the person can walk, can send email addresses. So these are all what comprises a lot on object-oriented programming, where objects are created, and through that objects you'll be able to get attributes and methods of those objects. Okay, so that is what the classes actually do here in our programming aspect. Yeah, so in this tutorial we are going to learn more about Python classes, where, as we said, is just like a blueprint here to be able to create what objects. So in our previous tutorial, when we're learning something about a list and the rest, we're able to access methods of the list. So let's say numbers equals to list of numbers. Let's say 1, 2, 3. Now, after we assign this to variable, when we type numbers dot, you can see we have all these methods of a list. Okay, yeah, just because lists have those methods, but in classes we need to create those methods. Okay, so that we'll be able to make sure it works within what the object we created or the class we created. Yeah, so here what it's doing is let's say we have something like, let me give you an example, like a shopping cart. A shopping cart doesn't have this kind of stuff. So how do you know that it has a method of maybe buying, running, and the whole lot of stuff? This is where classes comes in place. So we need to create a class, then we define methods or functions for that class, so that we'll be able to use that class to access everything we want to do, or whether it's a shopping cart or whether we're working with employees, we should be able to derive something or like a function for it to be able to use those stuff. So let's try to work around here and do more examples so that I show you what we mean by defining a class and giving it what an object, and attributes, and some methods. So this is all what classes actually do. So since you've had this general briefing of how classes works, let's try to do example here so we all understand together. Now, to define a class, we just use a keyword called class. Then make sure when you are naming a class, you should use the Pascal naming sequence. I've told you about the naming sequence already in our previous video. So here we use the Pascal naming, which means the first word should be capital when you are dealing with classes. The moment you use small letters, it's not a class anymore. It could be like you are defining a function or something. But just class is a special, so you always use what? Capital when you are trying to give a class name. So let's give example like we have a bike, a bicycle, or a car. Yeah, but in this example, we are going to use a bicycle. So our class is going to be bike. I'm making it simple. I can use bicycle, but we suggest use bike. Okay. Then you should always remember to bring color so that we can indent our what, because classes, functions, and the rest use indentations a lot, like the for loops, the if statements. The same way is what classes and functions are used. So the moment you use that keyword and you bring a color, it will automatically indent it for you. So please, after you create your class name, try to bring your colon and not just hit enter. It's going to indent it for you. But if it doesn't indent, you should at least check like 4 spaces from here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So let's say 1, 2, 3, 4. Exactly. Because I'll be in that position. Then now we can give a variable under this class. Let's give a variable and store an empty string. Yeah, we are not going to put anything in this string. Then let's say, so now GA, and let's say our GA is 0. Okay, perfect. So what are we doing here? Now the bike is the class name, and these variables we created are just inside the class with what default value. So here we just give an empty. Here we set it to 0. Now this is where we start to create what? An object. So as I said, an object is just called like an instance of a class. So when we create an object, we are creating an instance of a class. So this is our class, the name called bike. And to create an instance, we can just use something like maybe bike 1, okay, or bike 2 or something like that. So to create an instance of this class, you should make sure you give 2 spaces and make sure your cursor aligns with the class. Then we can say bike 1 equals to the bike itself, which is our class. Now what is happening here? This is our class, and we created an object. This is the object of an instance. You know, we just used the name bike and we added 1, okay? But this is become an object of the instance of this class name, which means if it's employee, we can write here employee 1, okay? So this becomes an object of the instance of this class, okay? So since you've done this, now we can just modify what the properties or the attributes here of this bike, which has a bike name and a GA as which is represented as what a variable here. So how do you modify it? All we need to do is just write bike, which is the object. Then when we hit dot none, as I told you, like when you're dealing with list, the moment you store a list in a variable, when you hit maybe the variable name dot, it brings you all the methods within that, or the attributes, okay? The methods or those properties you always see here. Now, because we created this here as what the property of this, because everybody has a name and GS and stuff, the moment we hit the dot, it brings those properties for us to use. Because we want to modify this property, because first we set this at an empty string. So now bike 1 dot the name, okay? Then what do you want to pass in to that empty string? Let's say a mountain bike. Perfect. Then we can also give our GA also a name, okay? So we can say bike 1 dot GA. Sorry, it's not a name like I figure, because here when we're dealing with GA, we just put out an empty or default value. Yeah. So now we can give a default value, like a new value for our bike. So it's a bike dot then we access what the properties of this bike. Now here, then let's set it to, let's say 20. So I'm using 20 gears for this mountain bike, which means my bike is going to speed up. Then after that, we can just print the bike name. Okay, so you just hit print and bike dot name. Simple. Now what is happening here? When we print the name, because this name is now behaving as an object with this property, but it's behaving as what a variable which is storing what this information we pass through to this empty string. Okay, so bike dot name is equal to what? The mountain bike. So when we print bike one dot name, we need to see this on the screen. And when we print bike one dot gear, we should see this or integer value. Okay, so let's try to run our code and see what happens. Perfect. When you run our code, we saw what mountain bike display on the screen. So we can just space out and also write bike dot gear. Now when you run this, it's going to be about mountain bike with 20 gears. So with 20 gears, you can just add concatenate with what? GS 20 GS. Can space out, then let's run again. It's giving error. What is happening here? Okay, let me delete this. I use formatted string. Okay, so that will be nice. Let's see. Yeah, perfect. So this will be rather in our curly brackets. Let me put in our bike.name. I show you this formatted string in our previous video, so it's simple. Then we can also put this in bracket, curly bracket, bike.gear. And now we can add our information to it. Perfect, it should work now. Yeah. So mountain bike 20 gear. So mountain bike with 20 gears. Okay, and you have 1 gear, 2 gears. Okay, mountain bike with 20 gears. So you see, we first created our class name and it has what these properties or attributes, and we created an object of the instance of the class. Then we had this bike with this mountain, and we passed this mountain information to this empty string. Then now we have bike one with this, and we just printed this thing out. Once where our information will be stored. Okay, so this is actually what I want you to know about classes. So in another example, we want to create a multiple objects from a class, and this time we are going to work with something called let's say you are in a working with your employees. So this is what we are going to do. Now going to delete this. Now let's try to create a class. So class employee color. Then what are we going to do now? We want employee ID. We create an employee ID variable and set it to a default value of 0. Now what we need to do now is, now we have a class. We are going to create an object called employee word. We are creating this of an instance of this class. Okay, so employee one, employee two. And let's try to add another employee. Employee number 3. It creates that object from this instance. Okay, now we have 3 employees, and we have what? A variable as a what? Property of this what class, which is set to a default value of 7. Now we can now assign ID to every employee right here. Okay, so it's going to be employee. Let's start with employee 1 dot the property. Okay, we access that property and we assign a value, let's say employee 1 or 2. That is this ID number. Then let's say employee 2 dot employee ID is equal to 104. Then employee 3 dot employee ID is equal to 106. Simple as that. Now, since you'll be able to access those properties and assign a value, now we can print them out. So we can print employee 1 dot employee ID. Then let's try to copy this. So copy and paste. Then paste. Then we just change the employee this to 2. Then this to 3, because you are going to print all this employee on the screen. So we created our class and we just created a variable which is acts as a property here of the class and assigned a value of 0 to it. Then we created what? An object from what? This class. An object is an instance of class. Then now with this employee dot ID, we assign what? We access that property here and assign different value to it here. So employee 1 had the ID of 102, 2, 104, employee 3, 106. Then after that, we want to print all this ID. So let's run our code and see what happens. So perfect. Now it's printed out 102, 104, and 106 as the values or the default values we assign to it. Okay, for each and every employee. So with this, we're able to create an ID for our employee at our workplace. So now this comes to how the methods also work in our classes. So how do we work within this kind of methods? Okay, so we are going to create a different class. Let me delete this. Now let's have a class like we have a room. Okay, like in our room, like the room you are now learning from the best Python course on the planet. Let's say your room has a length, it has a breadth, because every room has length and breadth. Okay, so this is, we are going to create a class with those properties. Okay, then after that, we are going to define a function to be able to calculate the length and the breadth of the room. And after that, we create an object of the room. Then we assign values to what? Those default values we will create from that properties of that room. Then we will try to access a method we created, which is a function we created within that class, to be able to what? Calculate or give us the final results of what we did. So let's try to work around this example. And I think this will be all done with what classes, so that in the next video I'll be teaching you more about inheritance and what polymorphism, which most programmers talk about inheritance, but they don't explain more about polymorphism. I will try to give you those differences here so we learn throughout the course. So let's try to create the example we just did. So what we need to do is first, we need to create a class of a room. So it's a simple, yes, use the keyword class. Then make sure your first letter is always capital. Then bring your column. Now we said that our room has a length and breadth. So length 0.0 breadth, 0.0. Now, since we are done with this properties of a room, we are going to define a method to be able to use that method when we access it. Okay, so let's define. We use the def keyword. Now, what are we doing? We want to calculate the length and the breadth. So we define a function with a function called calculate area. Okay, calculate the area into bracket. Now, what is this self method saying? This is kind of a constructor in Python, which is self-initializing itself when we don't even have what a parameter in this. Okay, so this is what a function. We've talked about function already. So you see now we are implementing function here in our class. So everything you learn, you might implement it one way or the other in different topic we are treating. Yeah. Right, so even if you are building a project, you are going to implement all these things together. So when we define calculate area, this is our function, because this is what we are going to call. So it's a function or method of this class. Okay. Then what do you want to print after all? We delete this. We want to print out the area of our room. So let's say area of room will be self dot length multiply by self dot breadth. So what is happening here is this self initialization, which is a constructor in Python. Okay, so anytime you try to define a function, it already created an initialization for you before you can pass through. You can pass what your parameters to. So this is a parameter on itself from the dev class. Okay, the dev function. Okay, so we can pass different parameter here without even the set, but for this tutorial sake, we leave it like as a default value. Okay, so we are just assessing. We are using this to assess what the sort properties from the class. So because you want to calculate what the area of the room, we need the length and the breadth to be able to calculate. So we've created a method here. Now, what we need to do now is to create an object of the class, so that after creating the object, we can assess the properties and assign value, because now we're putting default values here. It means if we calculate now, we'll get 0. That's not what we want. We need to give it a specific dimension of how our room looks like. Okay, so after creating this method, which we are going to use later in the code, let's create our object or the instance of our class. So let's say study room. Let's give a name like study room. Our study room should be equal to the room, which is the instance of this class. So study room equals to room. So now this study room is our object. Okay, and it's an instance of this class called room. Okay, so now since we've created, now we can use our object to assess the properties of this room, which is the length and breadth. Then we assign our values to it. So study room dot length. Then let's say our room length is 50.5. Why are we using 50.5? Because here we set our value to 0.0, which is a float number. Float. But when you measure room, you can't get integer, you get some maybe dot point. So you should always try to be a bit realistic when you are dealing with these kinds of examples. Okay, then study room dot breadth is another property. We set it to, let's say, 35.8. Now because you want to calculate the area of the room, what do we need to do? You study room dot. Now we can access what this function within what our class. We created this function, so dot calculate. So you could see this is the room, and now these are all our methods and our methods, okay, within what the class of properties. But this was our method we created here, or the function. We just set calculate the area. Select this one, then now let's run our code and see what happened. So now, after we access this function to calculate the area, it was able to print out what our algorithm or our calculation we made here, and it was able to print our area of the room to be 1807. Okay, so now we created a class, we defined what a method within the class, we created an object, we access the properties within this and assign a new value to this default value, and also same thing. Then now we call our object with a method or a function called calculate area. So you can create different functions, and when you want to finally print out, you just what use the dot to access what those methods or function within what your class. Okay, so that is basically all about classes I wanted to explain to you. As I told you, we have one called constructor which initialize everything when there's a parameter self. Okay, but when you're treating function, you can pass in parameters of how you want so that you'll be able to access it later. So I'm not making this video long. This ends all the knowledge you need to know about classes, and you've done like 3 examples for you to have all the ideas how to create a class, you define a method or a function, you create an object, and try to access those properties within your classes to be able to assign values or anything to it. Then after that, you can print out whatever you want to print out. So you can define as much functions within your code. And that'll be all for today. Take care and see you. I'm CEO Co-Instructor Dr. Don from Learn with Your